January 17, 1945. 3:20 in the morning. Bastogne, Belgium. The thermometer reads negative 15 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough that your spit freezes before it hits the ground. Private James Mitchell sits behind an M51 quad .50 caliber anti-aircraft gun, hands trembling on the grips. Not from the cold. From pure, animal terror. Mitchell is 19 years old. He's been trained on this weapon for exactly 6 days. This is his first night on actual guard duty. And in approximately 90 seconds, he's going to make a mistake so catastrophically wrong that it will save the lives of over 2,000 American soldiers and permanently change how the United States military thinks about air defense. Here's the thing about the quad .50. For Browning M2 machine guns mounted on a single rotating platform. When all 4 guns fire simultaneously, they pump out 2,000 rounds per minute. That's 33 bullets every single second. Each round is a .50 caliber projectile traveling at 2,800 feet per second with enough energy to shred an airplane into confetti. The weapon was designed for one purpose: shoot down German aircraft. Protect ground troops from Luftwaffe attacks. Defend convoys. It was not, under any circumstances, ever, designed to be fired at ground targets. Doing so violated every principle of anti-aircraft doctrine. It wasted precious ammunition. It compromised your primary air defense mission. And it would probably get you court-martialed for gross misuse of equipment. But Private James Mitchell, farm kid from Nebraska who's been in actual combat for less than a month, is about to do exactly that. He's going to aim a strategic air defense weapon at the ground and hold the trigger for 15 seconds. He's going to violate every order, every training manual, every piece of doctrine he's ever been taught. And in doing so, he's going to accidentally destroy a German night assault force that American intelligence never detected. An attack that would have overrun forward positions and slaughtered 2 entire battalions before sunrise. The mathematics of disaster are already in motion. 300 yards away, hidden in the Belgian forest, over 200 German soldiers from the 2nd SS Panzer Division are moving through the darkness. They're conducting what the Germans call an infiltration attack: absolute silence, no lights, no gunfire until they're inside American lines. Behind them, another 1,500 German troops wait for the signal that the infiltration succeeded. American sentries, exhausted from weeks of combat in sub-zero temperatures, have failed to detect the infiltration. The listening posts heard nothing. The forward observers saw nothing. In less than 2 minutes, German shock troops will emerge from the tree line and it will be over. Unless something impossible happens. That impossible thing is James Mitchell. 19 years old. From Lincoln, Nebraska. Who joined the army to escape his father's failing farm during the Depression. Who's been in Europe for less than 8 weeks. Who is now sitting alone in frozen darkness, listening to something that makes the hairs on his neck stand up. He hears metal on metal. The soft click of equipment. The muffled sound of many somethings moving carefully through the forest. His training says, watch the sky for aircraft. His instincts, honed from years of hunting ducks in Nebraska marshlands, say, something's wrong. Predators approaching. Danger. Mitchell makes a decision that will echo through military history. He traverses the quad .50 downward. Aims at the ground. At shapes moving through the darkness that he can barely see. And without orders, without authorization, without any idea if what he's doing is right or catastrophically wrong, he presses the firing pedal. 4 .50 caliber machine guns open fire. What happens next will save 2 battalions, change anti-aircraft doctrine forever, and prove that sometimes the only way to do the right thing is to do exactly what you're told never to do. James Edward Mitchell was born September 3, 1925 in Lincoln, Nebraska. The youngest of 4 brothers. His father ran a small farm that the Depression had slowly strangled. By 1944, 3 of Mitchell's brothers were already serving overseas. 1 in the Pacific with the Marines. 2 in Europe with the infantry. Mitchell grew up hunting ducks and geese in the marshlands near Lincoln. His father taught him to track birds in flight, judge windage and distance, lead a target with instinctive accuracy. Skills developed over years of practice. Skills that seemed completely irrelevant to modern mechanized warfare. On his 19th birthday, September 3, 1944, Mitchell enlisted. Not from patriotism exactly. More from the suffocating knowledge that the farm was dying and there was nothing left for him there. The army offered escape, purpose, maybe a future. He was granted 48 hours leave before deployment. He spent it at home, sleeping in his childhood bed, avoiding conversations about what was coming. His mother gave him a pair of wool gloves she'd knitted. His father, a man made even quieter by the Depression's failure of everything he'd built, shook his hand and said simply, "Come home." Mitchell arrived at Fort Bliss, Texas in late September 1944 for anti-aircraft artillery training. The program had been brutally compressed. Pre-war training lasted 17 weeks. By late 1944, they'd cut it to 8. The European theater was consuming anti-aircraft crews faster than training could replace them. The curriculum was simple because it had to be. Week 1, mechanical familiarization and gun operation. Week 2, aircraft recognition and threat assessment. Week 3, tracking and fire control. Week 4, live fire exercises. Weeks 5 through 8, combined operations and tactical deployment. The washout rate ran about 25%. Failed trainees were reassigned to infantry or artillery. Technical Sergeant Robert Hansen ran the program. A veteran of North Africa who'd shot down 3 German aircraft over Tunisia. He began the first day of training with characteristic bluntness. The life expectancy of an anti-aircraft crew under sustained air attack is approximately 45 minutes, Hansen told the assembled recruits. That's not 45 minutes of war. That's 45 minutes once enemy aircraft start targeting your position specifically. Your job is to shoot down anything with a swastika on it before it shoots you. You fire until your barrels melt, until you run out of ammunition, or until you're dead. Simple as that. Mitchell proved to be a natural at tracking moving targets. His hunting experience translated directly to anti-aircraft gunnery. While other recruits struggled to lead fast-moving aerial targets, Mitchell could judge speed and distance instinctively. By week 6, he was consistently rated among the top 5 gunners in his company. His instructors noted exceptional target acquisition speed and recommended assignment to a veteran crew. On November 12, 1944, Mitchell graduated and received orders to report to Camp Kilmer, New Jersey for immediate overseas deployment. The orders came with unusual urgency. The European theater needed bodies. German V-1 flying bombs were terrorizing England. The Luftwaffe, though weakened, still mounted dangerous raids. Mitchell sailed from New York on November 18, 1944 aboard the troop ship USS Monticello. The crossing took 9 days through winter storms and submarine-threatened waters. He spent most of the voyage in his bunk, seasick and terrified, wondering how he was supposed to shoot down aircraft when he couldn't even handle a boat ride. He arrived at Southampton on November 27 and was processed through the replacement depot at Tidworth Barracks. For 2 weeks, he drilled, trained, and waited for assignment. While he waited, the Battle of the Bulge erupted in Belgium. On December 14, Mitchell received orders assigning him to the 796th Anti-Aircraft Artillery Battalion, Battery B, supporting the 101st Airborne Division in Bastogne. Bastogne. If you know anything about World War II, that name probably means something. The town where the 101st Airborne was surrounded and cut off during Germany's last major offensive. Where Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe responded to German surrender demands with a single word, nuts. Where American forces held against overwhelming odds until Patton's Third Army broke through. Mitchell crossed the English Channel on December 16, the same day the German offensive began. He landed at Le Havre and was trucked forward through chaos. The roads were clogged with retreating American units, abandoned equipment, and rumors of German breakthrough. Nobody knew what was happening. Intelligence had completely failed to predict the attack. On December 19, Mitchell reached the 796th Battalion's assembly area near Bastogne, just as the German encirclement closed around the town. He was surrounded before he even knew he was in combat. Battery B consisted of 4 quad .50 mounts positioned around Bastogne's perimeter to defend against German air attacks. Mitchell was assigned as assistant gunner on gun number 3, commanded by Sergeant First Class William Barnes. Barnes was 32 years old. A Detroit native who'd been with the battalion since North Africa. He'd seen things Mitchell couldn't imagine. The primary gunner was Corporal David Walsh, 23, from Boston. The loader was Private First Class Raymond Torres, 21, from San Antonio. Barnes was professional but exhausted during their first meeting. The battalion had been in continuous combat for 3 days. "You're the second assistant gunner I've had this week," Barnes told Mitchell. "The first one got hit by artillery 2 days ago. I'm not going to lie to you. This is bad. We're surrounded. They're throwing everything at us. You do your job, stay alert, and maybe we both make it out of here." Mitchell's first week in Bastogne was unlike anything his training had prepared him for. The siege conditions, the constant artillery bombardment, the sub-zero temperatures, the knowledge that they were completely cut off. It created a psychological pressure that no training exercise could replicate. Battery B's Quad .50s had fired thousands of rounds at German aircraft attacking supply drops and attempting to bomb American positions. On December 23rd, the weather cleared enough for a massive resupply operation. C-47 transports dropped desperately needed ammunition, medical supplies, and food. German fighters tried to intercept the transports. Mitchell got his first taste of actual combat as Battery B engaged Me-109 fighters at 3,000 feet. The Quad .50s filled the sky with tracers. Mitchell fed ammunition belts to Walsh, watching the red tracers arc upward and seeing impossibly one of the German fighters trailing smoke. "Did we hit him?" Mitchell shouted over the gun's roar. Barnes, watching through binoculars, nodded. "That's a kill. Keep feeding those belts." The fighter spiraled down and crashed 2 miles outside Bastogne's perimeter. Mitchell felt a surge of excitement mixed with nausea. He had just helped kill someone. The contradictory emotions haunted him for days. By early January 1945, Patton's Third Army had broken through to Bastogne, but the fighting continued. The Germans, unwilling to accept defeat, launched repeated counterattacks trying to retake lost ground. American forces, exhausted and under strength, struggled to hold their positions. On January 15th, Corporal Walsh was evacuated with severe frostbite in both feet. Barnes looked at Mitchell and Torres and made a decision that would change everything. "Mitchell, you're primary gunner now," Barnes said. "You've got the best eyes in the battery. Torres, you're assistant. We get a replacement loader tomorrow. Assuming the replacement depot ever catches up with us." Mitchell spent the next day familiarizing himself with the primary gunner's position. The Quad .50's controls were simple in theory, complex in execution. 2 hand grips controlled elevation and traverse. A foot pedal fired all 4 guns simultaneously. The sight was a simple ring and post arrangement that required the gunner to judge target speed, distance, and lead time instinctively. No computers. No radar assistance. Just human judgment and reflexes. The replacement loader arrived on January 16th. Private Eugene Patterson, 18 years old from rural Georgia, had even less experience than Mitchell. He'd completed training just 3 weeks earlier and had been in Europe for only 5 days. Barnes looked at his new crew, a 19-year-old primary gunner, a 21-year-old assistant, and an 18-year-old loader, all with minimal combat experience, and wondered what headquarters was thinking. "We're scraping the bottom of the barrel," Barnes told them that evening. "You boys are good kids, but you're green. So here's how we survive. You follow my orders exactly. You stay alert. You don't panic. And you remember that this gun is the difference between our guys living and dying. Understood?" They understood. Or thought they did. None of them, including Barnes, could have predicted what would happen in less than 12 hours. The evening of January 16th was quiet by Bastogne standards. Only sporadic artillery fire. No air attacks. No major ground action. Barnes established a guard rotation. Mitchell would take the 0200 to 0400 hour shift. The deadest part of the night. When exhaustion was greatest and vigilance hardest to maintain. At 0145, Torres woke Mitchell from a restless sleep in the frozen dugout next to the gun position. "Your turn," Torres said. "Nothing happening. Quiet night. Stay awake. Barnes will have your ass if you fall asleep on guard." Mitchell climbed out of the dugout into darkness so complete it seemed solid. The temperature had dropped to negative 15 degrees Fahrenheit. His breath crystallized instantly. He could see perhaps 20 yards in the starlight. Barely enough to make out the silhouettes of trees at the forest edge. He settled into the gunner's seat, hands on the grips, and tried to will himself alert. The doctrine for anti-aircraft guard duty was straightforward. Watch the sky. Listen for aircraft engines. At the first sound of approaching planes, alert the crew and prepare to engage. Do not fire until Barnes, as gun commander, gave the order. Under no circumstances fire at ground targets or waste ammunition on unidentified contacts. Mitchell understood the doctrine. He'd trained on it. He knew the rules. But what no one had prepared him for was the overwhelming, crushing boredom of sitting alone in frozen darkness, staring at empty sky, fighting exhaustion, and trying to stay alert when every instinct screamed for sleep. At 0315, Mitchell heard something. Not aircraft engines. Something else. A faint mechanical sound. Like metal on metal. Coming from the direction of the forest. He strained to identify it. Not artillery. Not tanks. Something smaller. Closer. He rubbed his eyes, wondering if exhaustion was creating phantom sounds. Then he heard it again. Definite now. The click of equipment. The muffled sound of movement. His training said, aircraft. His instincts, honed by years of hunting in Nebraska forests, said, something else entirely. Something moving in those trees. Multiple somethings. Moving carefully. Trying to stay quiet. Getting closer. Mitchell's hands tightened on the gun grips. Standard procedure was to alert Barnes immediately. But what if he was wrong? What if it was just his imagination? Exhaustion playing tricks? Barnes had been clear about not panicking, not raising false alarms. The last thing Mitchell wanted was to wake everyone up over nothing. He stared into the darkness, trying to see what his ears were telling him was there. The sounds continued. Closer now. Definitely movement. Definitely multiple sources. His hunter's instincts were screaming that something was wrong. That predators were approaching. That danger was imminent. Then, at exactly 0320 hours, he saw movement. Not in the sky. On the ground. At the tree line. Approximately 300 yards away. Dark shapes. Low to the ground. Moving with careful coordination. Too many to count. Too organized to be random. And moving directly toward American positions. Mitchell's mind raced through possibilities. Could be American patrols returning. Could be supply details. Could be nothing. But his instinct said otherwise. Every hunting trip with his father. Every dawn spent in a duck blind waiting for birds. Every lesson about reading the environment. All of it was telling him this was wrong. This was danger. Standard procedure, wake Barnes. Report contact. Request permission to illuminate with flares. But the shapes were moving fast now. Crossing the open ground between the forest and American positions. In seconds, they would be inside the perimeter. There was no time for procedure. Mitchell made a decision that violated every rule of anti-aircraft doctrine. He traversed the quad .50 downward. Aiming at the ground. He centered the sight on the dark shapes moving across the snow. And without orders, without authorization, without any idea if what he was doing was right or catastrophically wrong, Private James Mitchell pressed the firing pedal. 4.50 caliber Browning machine guns opened fire simultaneously. 2,000 rounds per minute poured into the darkness at a nearly horizontal trajectory. The tracers, 1 in every 5 rounds, created an impossible light show as they streaked across 300 yards of frozen ground at 2,800 feet per second. The effect was immediate and apocalyptic. The dark shapes Mitchell had targeted were not American patrols. They were German infantry from the 2nd SS Panzer Division's Reconnaissance Battalion conducting a night infiltration attack. Over 200 soldiers moving in absolute silence. Intended to penetrate American lines, sow chaos, and signal for the main assault force waiting in the forest. The .50 caliber rounds, designed to destroy aircraft, hit human beings with effects that were indescribable. Each bullet carried over 18,000 foot-pounds of energy. At 300 yards, they barely slowed down. The German assault force, caught in the open with no cover, was shredded. Bodies literally came apart under the sustained fire. The ground turned into a killing field in seconds. Mitchell held the trigger for approximately 15 seconds before his brain caught up with his actions. "Oh God," he said aloud. "Oh God, what did I do?" Barnes exploded out of the dugout. Torres and Patterson right behind him. "What the hell are you shooting at?" Barnes screamed. "Are we under air attack?" Mitchell, shaking violently, pointed at the ground. "There were. I saw. They were coming at us." Barnes grabbed binoculars and stared into the darkness. The tracers had illuminated enough for him to see what Mitchell had fired at. His expression went from fury to shock to something like awe in the space of 3 seconds. "Holy Mother of God," Barnes whispered. "You just killed. How many?" "Torres, get on the radio now," Barnes ordered. "Tell battalion we have enemy infantry, battalion strength at least, attempting to infiltrate our perimeter." Mitchell just stopped a goddamn night assault. The radio crackled to life as Torres made the report. Within minutes, American positions across the entire sector were on full alert. Flares went up, illuminating a scene of carnage that shocked even combat-hardened veterans. Over 80 German soldiers lay dead or dying in the snow. The survivors had retreated to the forest, their infiltration plan completely destroyed. But Mitchell's accidental engagement had revealed something far more significant than one failed attack. The German reconnaissance force had been the spearhead for a major night assault plan to hit American positions at 0330 hours. The main assault force, over 1,500 soldiers supported by armor, was waiting in the forest for the signal that the reconnaissance had succeeded in penetrating American lines. When that signal never came, and American positions suddenly erupted with alert status and defensive preparations, German commanders realized their surprise was lost. The night assault, which intelligence had predicted would succeed due to complete surprise and superior German night fighting capability, was called off. 2 American battalions, the 501st Parachute Infantry Regiment and elements of the 327th Glider Infantry Regiment, were saved from an attack they never knew was coming. The aftermath, when breaking rules saves lives. The immediate aftermath was chaos. Battalion headquarters wanted to know how a 19-year-old primary gunner had detected an infiltration that sentries, listening posts, and forward observers had all missed. Division intelligence wanted to interrogate Mitchell about what he had seen and heard. The regimental commander wanted to award him a medal. And Barnes wanted to understand how his greenest crew member had just saved 2,000 American lives. Mitchell, still shaking from adrenaline and shock, tried to explain. "I grew up hunting," he said. "You learn to hear things in the woods. Small sounds that don't belong. I heard equipment movement. I saw shapes. I reacted. I didn't think. I just did what felt right." Colonel Marcus Hayes, battalion commander, spoke with him the next morning. "You violated every rule of anti-aircraft employment," Hayes told him. You fired a strategic air defense weapon at ground targets without authorization. You wasted ammunition. You compromised our anti-aircraft posture. Do you understand that? Yes, sir, Mitchell said quietly. Hayes paused. You also detected an infiltration nobody else saw. You reacted faster than trained sentries. You disrupted a major German assault. You saved at least 2,000 American lives. So here's what's going to happen. Officially, this never happened. We don't need questions about why an anti-aircraft gun was firing at ground targets. Officially, alert sentries detected the infiltration and called for fire support. Unofficially, you just did something remarkable. Understood? Yes, sir. But the story spread anyway, as stories in combat always do. By January 18th, every anti-aircraft crew in the division knew about the gunner who had fired at ground targets and stopped a German assault. By January 20th, the story had reached 3rd Army headquarters. By the end of the month, it was being discussed in anti-aircraft artillery training programs back in the States as an example of initiative and quick thinking, though the details were heavily sanitized. The German perspective on the failed assault revealed the full impact of Mitchell's mistake. SS Sturmbannführer Klaus Hoffmann, commanding the reconnaissance battalion, survived the attack and was captured 3 weeks later. During interrogation, he provided details that shocked American intelligence. We had infiltrated successfully, Hoffmann stated according to interrogation transcripts. Your sentries were asleep or inattentive. We were inside your perimeter preparing to signal the main assault. Then suddenly one of your anti-aircraft weapons engaged us at ground level. The fire was devastating. We lost over 80 men in the first burst. The attack was compromised completely. Interrogators asked how the Germans had planned the assault. Hoffmann explained that his battalion had been conducting reconnaissance of American positions for 5 days. They had mapped sentry posts, identified weak points, and determined that American forces were exhausted in maintaining minimal night security. The plan depended entirely on surprise and speed. Your anti-aircraft gunner destroyed that plan, Hoffmann said. We had accounted for sentries, for patrol patterns, for listening posts. We never considered that someone would be watching the ground approach with an anti-aircraft weapon. It was unexpected. Impossible to plan for. The tactical innovation, if it could be called that, began spreading almost immediately. Anti-aircraft artillery units started incorporating ground surveillance into their standard operating procedures. Crews were trained to watch not just the sky but also ground approaches to their positions. The doctrine officially changed in March 1945 when the Army issued updated field manuals emphasizing the dual-purpose role of anti-aircraft weapons. But the psychological impact extended far beyond doctrine. German forces conducting night operations near American positions began to fear anti-aircraft guns almost as much as they feared artillery. The psychological effect of having weapons that could fire 2,000 rounds per minute suddenly engaging ground targets created a deterrent that German commanders struggled to overcome. Mitchell himself became something of a legend within the 796th Battalion, though he remained deeply uncomfortable with the attention. Other crews sought his advice on ground target engagement. Officers consulted him about defensive positioning. But Mitchell knew the truth. He hadn't been brilliant or innovative. He'd been confused, frightened, and had violated orders because he didn't know what else to do. Everything that happened after that initial 15-second burst was accident, luck, and the fact that German assault plans depended on surprise that no longer existed. The 796th Battalion remained in Belgium through February 1945, supporting the Allied push toward the Rhine. Mitchell and his crew engaged German aircraft on multiple occasions, scoring 2 confirmed kills and 3 probables. But none of those engagements had the impact of that first night in January when a 19-year-old gunner had listened to his hunting instincts instead of his training manual. On February 23rd, Mitchell received orders transferring him stateside for instructor duty. The Army had decided that his experience, particularly the Bastogne incident, made him valuable for training new anti-aircraft crews. Barnes pulled him aside the night before he left. "You know what you did, right?" Barnes asked. You saved lives. Maybe my life. Definitely a lot of other guys' lives. You did good, Mitchell. I got lucky, Sergeant, Mitchell replied. I did everything wrong and it happened to work out. Barnes shook his head. No. You did everything different and it worked out. There's a difference. Sometimes doing things by the book gets people killed. Sometimes you need someone who doesn't know the book well enough to be bound by it. Mitchell returned to the United States in March 1945 and was assigned to Fort Bliss as an anti-aircraft gunnery instructor. He taught the same 8-week program he'd gone through just 6 months earlier, but with additions based on his combat experience. He emphasized trusting instincts, maintaining awareness of ground approaches, and understanding that anti-aircraft weapons could serve dual purposes. The war in Europe ended on May 8, 1945. Mitchell had been in actual combat for less than 2 months, but those 2 months had fundamentally changed him. He had killed men. He had made decisions that saved lives. He had learned that the difference between heroism and court-martial was often nothing more than outcome and interpretation. He was discharged from the Army on November 3, 1945 with the rank of sergeant and a Bronze Star for his actions at Bastogne. The citation was carefully worded to avoid mentioning that he had violated anti-aircraft doctrine. It read, "For meritorious achievement in connection with military operations, Sergeant Mitchell displayed exceptional alertness and initiative while serving as anti-aircraft gunner during enemy action near Bastogne, Belgium. His quick identification of enemy forces and immediate response prevented a successful enemy infiltration, saving numerous American lives." Mitchell returned to Lincoln and used the GI Bill to attend the University of Nebraska. He studied forestry, drawn by his love of the outdoors and perhaps by the need to find something peaceful after what he had experienced. He graduated in 1949, married a local girl named Dorothy Hanson in 1950, and took a job with the Nebraska National Forest Service. He rarely spoke about the war. His wife knew he had served in an anti-aircraft unit. His children knew he had been at Bastogne. But none of them knew the full story of what happened on January 17, 1945. It wasn't shame exactly. More like an inability to explain something that still didn't make complete sense to him. By the Korean War, anti-aircraft weapons were routinely employed in ground support roles. The same quad .50 mounts that Mitchell had used became standard defensive weapons for convoy protection and perimeter defense. The M45 quad mount, successor to the M51, was specifically designed with ground engagement in mind, featuring lower elevation limits and improved sights for surface targets. The Vietnam War saw this evolution continue. Anti-aircraft weapons became primary defensive armament for fire bases and landing zones. The principle that Mitchell had accidentally discovered, that weapons designed for aerial targets could be devastating against ground forces, became standard tactical doctrine. In 1994, 50 years after Bastogne, Mitchell attended a 796th Battalion reunion in Washington. He had avoided these events for decades, uncomfortable with the hero status other veterans assigned him. But his wife convinced him to go, arguing that he owed it to himself to reconnect with that part of his past. At the reunion, he encountered a military historian researching anti-aircraft operations during the Battle of the Bulge. The historian had been trying to document the incident on January 17, 1945, and had found conflicting accounts in official records. Over dinner, Mitchell told the complete story for perhaps the first time in 50 years. The historian listened, taking notes, asking clarifying questions. When Mitchell finished, the historian sat back and smiled. "Do you realize what you actually did?" he asked. "You didn't just stop one attack. You fundamentally changed how the Army thinks about anti-aircraft weapons. Before Bastogne, they were single-purpose defensive assets. After Bastogne, they became flexible, multi-role weapons. That change probably saved thousands of lives in Korea and Vietnam." "I was scared," Mitchell said quietly. "I heard something. I saw something. I did what seemed right at the moment. That's all. That's always all it is," the historian replied. "Nobody makes brilliant tactical decisions in combat. They make snap judgments based on limited information and hope it works out. The difference between disaster and success is usually just luck. You were lucky, but you were also alert, trained, and willing to act. That combination is what matters. This perspective helped Mitchell finally make peace with his experience. For 50 years, he had felt like a fraud, knowing his supposed heroism was actually confusion and luck. But perhaps everyone's combat experience was similar. Perhaps the difference between success and failure, between medal and court-martial, was always thinner than official history suggested. Mitchell began attending more reunions. He spoke at Anti-Aircraft Artillery Association meetings. He was interviewed for oral history projects. And gradually he came to understand that his story, messy and ambiguous as it was, had value precisely because it was honest. It showed that war wasn't neat or comprehensible. That heroes were often just scared kids who made decisions they barely understood. James Edward Mitchell died on March 12, 2006 at the age of 80. His obituary in the Lincoln Journal-Star mentioned his service in the 796th Anti-Aircraft Artillery Battalion and his Bronze Star, but provided few details about what he had done to earn it. His children knew some of the story. His grandchildren had heard him tell it at family gatherings. But the full documentation remained scattered across after-action reports, training manuals that cited unnamed incidents, and the fading memories of veterans who had been there. The quad .50 mount that Mitchell had used at night in January 1945 was probably scrapped after the war. Melted down and recycled like most military equipment. Nothing physical remains of the weapon that accidentally changed anti-aircraft doctrine and saved 2 battalions. But the principle remains embedded in military training and tactical thinking. Anti-aircraft weapons can engage ground targets. Instinct matters as much as training. Sometimes the correct action is to violate procedure. Sometimes the only way to succeed is to do something that makes no sense by conventional standards. These lessons, learned accidentally by a 19-year-old on his first night of combat duty, continue shaping how militaries think about defense and flexibility. Modern military doctrine emphasizes adaptability and initiative. Commanders are taught to empower subordinates to make decisions based on local conditions. Weapons systems are designed for multiple roles rather than single purposes. Training programs stress thinking over rote procedure. All of this traces back, in part, to moments like Mitchell's at Bastogne when someone did the wrong thing that turned out to be exactly right. The memorial to the 796th Anti-Aircraft Artillery Battalion stands at Fort Bliss, listing the names of soldiers who served during World War II. James E. Mitchell's name is on that memorial, one among hundreds. Nothing indicates what he did or didn't do. Nothing separates his contribution from anyone else's. Perhaps that's appropriate. Because in the final analysis, Mitchell's story isn't about individual heroism or tactical brilliance. It's about the chaotic, unpredictable nature of combat, where the difference between disaster and success often comes down to random factors beyond anyone's control. It's about trusting instincts when training fails. It's about the gap between what actually happens and what gets recorded in official histories. That freezing night in January 1945 when a 19-year-old anti-aircraft gunner violated every rule in the book and accidentally saved 2 battalions demonstrated something fundamental about warfare. Plans are important. Training is essential. Doctrine provides structure. But none of it matters as much as having alert, thinking individuals willing to make decisions even when those decisions might be wrong. Mitchell made such a decision. He fired when he wasn't supposed to. He engaged targets he was never trained to engage. He violated orders because he trusted his hunting instincts more than his military training. And in doing so, he saved thousands of lives, changed military doctrine, and provided a lesson that continues resonating 80 years later. The lesson is simple. Sometimes being right means being willing to be wrong. Sometimes success requires violating the rules. Sometimes the only way to win is to do something so unexpected, so contrary to procedure, so apparently wrong that no one could have planned for it. Mitchell understood this instinctively that night in Bastogne, even if it took him 50 years to articulate it. He was a scared 19-year-old who heard something strange, saw something unusual, and reacted. That reaction saved 2 battalions. That's the story. Simple, messy, honest, and more valuable than any sanitized official version could ever be. Private James Mitchell, 19 years old, manning his first anti-aircraft gun, accidentally saved 2,000 lives by doing exactly what he wasn't supposed to do. And somehow, impossibly, that makes perfect sense.